Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today is the entire team over at the Oraculos School of Astrology. And these are my wonderful, illustrious students who have been in my Foundations of Classical Astrology course for the past, how many weeks now? I feel like it's not been, what was that? Was that 6 or 7?
7.
7 for the past 7 weeks. You know, this entire time period has been a complete blur in my mind, and I can't believe that we've been at this for 7 weeks together. So thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart for being here, and I'm going to officially introduce everyone soon enough, but I just want to tell you guys, kudos to you. Thanks for making it, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So for those of you who, if this is your first time viewing the Oraculos True Divination podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews with astrologers from all around the world about various aspects of their astrological practice. However, today we're doing things a little bit differently because today I'm going to be talking to some of my students from the Oraculos School of Astrology to find out what their experience has been, and also to show you guys through a few chart examples some of the things that we've been working on together. So if you are interested in what we're doing here on the True Divination podcast, please do like and subscribe to my YouTube channel by hitting on the link down below. And apparently there's a bell. I didn't know that there was a bell, but apparently there's a bell that you have to hit on as well in order to get the notifications. So please, if you find that bell, hit that bell so that you guys can also get the notifications of podcasts that I post. I try to be weekly with this and bring out podcasts at least once a week. This week, we're doing things a little bit differently because I have some amazing astrologers who I've interviewed, and so we're a little bit backed up. So I may have to start releasing twice a week starting tomorrow. But all things considered, we're going to keep pushing forward, keep at it, and continue to bring you wonderful interviews that you love and enjoy. So thank you guys so much. Now, class, this is your first time on the True Divination podcast. How's everyone feeling?
Good. Good.
Good, good, good. So we have in class today Mrs. Irina Gorakova. Hey, Irina.
Hi, hi.
And then we have Mrs. Jessica Kulik in New York City. Hey, Jessica.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's finally summer.
Awesome. It's finally summer in NYC. Well, I'm happy for you. And we have Miss Ellen Key Cepeda, who is right up the road. Ellen is here in the Bahamas as well. And then we have Tyrone Antonio Weish, who's right up the road the next direction. And we have Miss Shari Kelly, who is in Jamaica. Shari, where in Jamaica are you right now?
I'm in Mandeville right now.
Oh yeah, you're in Mandeville. Shari's in
Home.
Shari's in cool Mandeville. Thanks for being there, Shari. And then we have Ms. Shauna Dawkins, who's up the road that way.
Yeah.
And on the bottom, who just joined in, is my dearly beloved aunt, who is the reason in a lot of ways for me getting into so many of the branches of mysticism and astrology that I'm in today. Ganga. Ganga, thank you so much for being here. And I know that you're having a little bit of mic difficulties, so you won't be able to talk, but all the same, thank you for being here today. So now we're going to pick up from where we left off at in our last class at Oraculos. And even though I know that you guys watching, you haven't been a part of our classes up until this point, we're going to take you through the fabric and the material of our class so that you can see not only what the students at Oraculos learn, but also so that you can see how we step by step and systematically work through the body of charts. And we're not just looking at horary charts today, we're looking at horary astrology and the natal promise, and the way in which horary astrology indeed ties into the natal promise. And this is a very important piece for me, particularly because I believe that the questions that we ask within the horary moment are inextricably linked to our natal charts. And this is something that I feel the person who really pioneered this approach to horary astrology was Evangeline Adams, who was an early 20th century astrologer who was very famous in America. And in her book, Astrology, Your Place in the Sun, that she published in the year 1927, she outlines a new approach to horary astrology that completely blew me away. And I definitely have to say major kudos to my dear friend, horary astrology extraordinaire, Mr. Anthony Lewis, who is the author of the book Horary Astrology, Plain and Simple. Because what Tony did is he brought this method to my attention, and when I read it in her book, it completely made sense. And so what Evangeline Adams is essentially saying is that if two people go to a horary astrologer both at the same time, or if they go to a horary astrologer within 5 minutes of each other, chances are all of the significators are still going to be the same. Now, we know that in general, it takes roughly about 4 minutes for a degree to rise on the ascendant. So if two people go to a horary astrologer within literally 5 to 10 minutes of each other, and we're not close to the end of a sign or the beginning of another sign, then what we find is that the cusps of the houses don't change that significantly. And what we know is that the cusps of the houses in horary astrology are of supreme importance because those cusps tell us where to find the information that we're looking for in the actual chart. And this isn't only true about horary astrology, but this is true about traditional astrology in general. I remember that it was something that was stated by a world famous astrologer by the name of Robert Hand, where he was giving a presentation on medieval natal astrology. And one of his starting remarks was that if you all have been trained in how to practice traditional horary astrology, you already know how to practice medieval natal astrology. And the reason for that, which I think is lost on us in modern times, is that after we've gone into the fabric of telling a person all that we can possibly tell them about their personalities, who they are, their likes and their dislikes, their love language, after we've gone into telling people all of the things that we can tell them about from the context of their charts, we all have the same questions. We all want to know, what's my financial life going to be like? What's my relationship with my community going to be like? What's my home life going to be like and the relationship with my parents? What's the relationship with my children be like? What's my relationship to health going to be like? What's the relationship to my spouse going to be like? We all have these questions of astrology that are answered in the 12 houses of the chart. So we tend to get very caught up on the first house in modern astrology insofar as we want to know about ourselves. We want to know, who am I? What makes me tick? What turns me on? And all of that is completely fine and dandy. But after we've already analyzed all of these aspects of our personality, it becomes very important for us to be able to know how to enter the natal promise of the chart in relation to the various other aspects of our lives that matter to us the most. And these other aspects of our lives are covered in the topics of the remaining 11 houses of the chart. So that's a part of why it becomes so important for us to understand really early on within our own astrological careers how to look at questions within the horoscope. Because we come to astrology with questions. And when we visit an astrologer, which oftentimes coincides with a period of deep, intense need, we oftentimes visit our astrologers because we have burning questions of life. So my particular persuasion is that we all should understand horary astrology. And this isn't because I believe that we're going to all have a romping horary astrology practice, but it's because I know that if the neophyte astrologer learns horary astrology as a gateway into astrology as a subject, then it opens up a grand canyon of possibilities for that astrologer that probably aren't really accessible if we were to find our way into astrology via another means. So I've recently been saying to a lot of people who've been questioning, why is it you're teaching horary astrology first? And one reason for that is because in the Renaissance, that was really the gateway into astrology. You learned astrology by learning horary first. The sequencing of the training was you learned horary, and then you learned electional. Because if we face it, electional is in a lot of ways reverse horary. Because the horary chart is us bringing our burning question to the moment and casting the chart for that moment and seeing what crystallizes within the body of that chart as an answer. Whereas the electional chart is having a desire within ourselves and saying, I want to choose the most auspicious time to start this business. I want to choose the most auspicious time to submit this proposal or to have this marriage or to lay the foundation block for my home. So the electional astrology is a proactive approach to astrology in a lot of ways, insofar as the electional chart is a chart that we contrive of our own efforts. We create electional charts that reflect the sort of auspicious outcome that we want to be associated with our endeavors. Whereas the horary chart is, I will bring my question to this moment because I know that within this moment is the seed information needed for me to have guidance in this particular aspect of my life. Instead of creating a chart that reflects the outcome that I want, I'm going to know internally that in me bringing this question to this moment already has the answer as to whether or not the outcome of this thing that I desire is going to be auspicious or not. So the horary astrology method, as well as the electional astrology method, they go hand in hand insofar as electional astrology is in a lot of ways reverse horary. Now, after that, then we see natal astrology coming into the equation, because the horary astrology, it trains your eyes to find things within a chart, and it trains your eyes to become very specific within the body of your chart delineation. Then the electional astrology teaches you how to distinguish what is a good chart from what is a bad chart. You know, do I really want to start my project when I have Saturn rising on the cusp of the ascendant? Possibly I do, depending on what that project is. But do I really want to start a project that seems to already have within it this inbuilt sense of stagnation or slowness? Or do I want to choose a more auspicious chart that adequately reflects the things that I want to fulfill in my project? So the electional astrology teaches us how to begin identifying what is a bad chart from what is a good chart. But honestly, that awareness of bad chart, good chart, it comes from our horary practice. Because there are some horary charts where we can unequivocally say that the answer to this question is no. And it's not just no by virtue of one way of saying no. This chart is saying no left, right, and center. You know, no matter which way we flip it and reverse it, this chart is still saying no to the specific question that this person is asking. And that ability to be able to be completely objective in terms of our approach to horary astrology, it then translates into the way in which we approach our electional astrology. And that translates into the specificity with which we begin to look at our natal astrology as a standalone practice. And then after natal astrology, in the sequencing of the various branches of astrology, comes mundane astrology, or the astrology of the world. And this is something that we see being mentioned in several Renaissance texts in which they outline the pathway into astrology. And it's also something that we see being stated by contemporary traditional astrologers who pretty much share the same opinion, that we start by getting that sharpness in horary, and then we fine-tune it with electional. And by the time as we've done those two processes, we are ready to begin tackling the mammoth task of discussing someone's natal promise with them in the context of their overall lives. So today, we're going to use as our launching pad not just the horary astrology method of the Renaissance, but we're also going to take into consideration some of the inbuilt promises that we all carry around with us within our natal charts. Now, something else that we're going to be going into that is going to be a little bit new for you all, my Oraculos family, is we're going to go into a deeper discussion of essential dignity and what that actually does within a chart, as well as accidental dignity and what that does for planets within the chart. And we're also going to dive into the topics of the planetary hours and the planetary hour ruler and why that becomes important within my approach to horary astrology, as well as the Dodecatomoria, or the 12th part of the Ascendant, as being one of these keys given to us by the ancients that allow us to know what is truly moving within the heart of the querent. So if any of this is of interest to you, gentle viewers, please do stick around. And also, if you haven't done so already, please do like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can continue to be a part of the wonderful momentum that we're building here at the Oraculos School of Astrology. And a final thing, shameless plug, because I just got this done literally this week, is my website for a long time has been tarotdharma.com, and it's one of those things where you feel like you've shot yourself in your foot because you automatically get associated with one thing and not all the other wonderful things that you do. So I have changed the name of my website to oraculosastrology.com. So if you guys want to check it out, you can check out the link in the description box below, and you will find all of the same content, but under a name that's truly reflective of all of the things that we do here at Oraculos. So that is www.oraculosastrology.com. And please do go over there, check it out, check out some of the courses that we offer. It's amazing. So please do go and check out oraculosastrology.com so you can see some of the incredible things that we're doing over there. Now, without further ado, let us now take a look at some charts. Okay, so this is our first chart of the day, and fortunately for us, the person who asked for this chart to be cast is here with us right now, so you can give us some corroborating details at the end, Ellen. So the very first thing that we do when we look at these horary charts is we look at the sign that's on the cusp of the ascendant. And that is here, for those of you who aren't sure about that, that's here. Because that automatically lets us know who is the ruler of this house. Now, in modern astrology, the tendency is there to give the rulership of Pisces to Neptune, the rulership of Aquarius to Uranus, I had to think about that for a second, and the rulership of Scorpio to Pluto. Now, this is slightly problematic insofar as classical horary astrology is concerned, because when we look towards Renaissance horary astrology, we're also looking at the classical rulers of the signs. And the classical rulers of the signs, as my students very well know, are, hit it,
Saturn, Jupiter,
Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon.
Precisely, it's like music to my ears. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, which I force everyone to memorize in their very first class. So we look towards the 7 classical planets, which are also the 7 visible planets, as having rulership over the signs of the zodiac, because that is the traditional framework within which we're operating. Now, this thing, when it came to planets ruling signs or planets ruling certain portions of signs within the zodiac, is something based on what portion of a sign or what sign allows a planet to show more of its essential nature. And this takes us into the discussion of essential dignity. Because essential dignity has to do with what allows a planet to feel empowered within its essence. What allows me to feel completely unencumbered and uninhibited in the way in which I express who I really am deep within myself. That is what the essential dignities do for all of the planets classically. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Moon all have either signs that they rule, signs that they're exalted in, or signs that they have some other sort of relationship to that buoys them or that lifts them up within themselves. And equally, they also have certain parts of the zodiac in which they aren't buoyed up, or in which they aren't lifted up in a way that supports them in terms of their essential nature. And this is really what essential dignity is about. In the modern era, where we say that Uranus rules Aquarius, I keep on having to think about it because it isn't something that's in my mind. Uranus rules Aquarius, and Pluto rules Scorpio, and Neptune rules Pisces. This is based on a concept of similarity. Some astrologers at some point in time said, hey, well, Neptune is similar to Pisces, therefore we're going to assign rulership of Pisces to Neptune because of its similarity. Or Uranus is similar to Aquarius, therefore we're going to assign Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius because of its similarity. And the same thing stands true for Pluto, most certainly for Pluto, because when this whole thing happened, and please forgive me for going off on a tangent, but when this whole thing of assigning rulerships happened after the discovery of Uranus, the rationale was that, well, hey, if Mercury rules Virgo, and Venus rules Libra, and Mars rules Scorpio, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and Saturn rules Capricorn, then it only makes sense that the next planet that we find must have rulership over Aquarius. Like, it does seem pretty sensible when you think about it. And so later on, when they discovered Neptune, the same thought process happened. If we gave Aquarius to Uranus, then let's also give Pisces to Neptune. And this seemed as if it was a really intelligent thing to be doing. You know, it was like people were patting themselves on the back because, yeah, that really makes sense. However, when they discovered Pluto in the year 1930, in true Plutonian fashion, Pluto was like, you're not going to put me in Aries, or you're not going to make me the ruler of Aries. And so the astrologers of the time kind of met a dead end with this concept of attributing rulerships to each of the signs in sequential order from Aquarius onward. Because if we follow this rationale, then Pluto should really be the ruler of Aries. And apparently, there's a small enclave of astrologers someplace in the world who actually do say that Pluto is the ruler of Aries. But for the most part, the astrological community realized, well, hey, that can't be correct because the most Martian sign of the zodiac is most definitely Aries. Like, Aries is unquestionably the domicile or the home of Mars. So that is when they decided to give the second Martian domicile, i.e., Scorpio, to Pluto, because they felt as if the similarity between Pluto as an archetypal mythological concept was more harmonious with the symbolism of Scorpio than Aries. So this concept of attribution based in sequential order got broken when they found Pluto, which says that at some level, this attribution is arbitrary. And granted, we still haven't discovered all there is to discover about our astrology. And in the words of William Shakespeare, there's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than can be dreamt of in your philosophy. We do know that the ancients devised their concept of rulership based on thousands of years of observing the heavens and of observing the geocosmic relationship between heaven and earth. And so insofar as our rulerships for classical astrology are concerned, we continue to use the planets in the Chaldean order of, hit it,
Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon.
Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, because these are the planets that, one, are visible to the naked eye, and two, because we found that these rulerships do stand the test of time. So for all intents and purposes, we're not going to be looking at these planets as being co-rulers of those signs, but we're going to look at Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Moon as continuing to be the specific rulers of the signs of the zodiac insofar as our classical approach is concerned. Now, that being said, within the context of our horary astrology that we've been doing as a class, we've been focusing primarily on which planet as our entry point into the chart.
Lord 1.
Yeah, Jess, Lord 1 as being our primary entry point into the chart. However, for the ancients, that wasn't necessarily the case. The ancients viewed the primary entry point into the chart as being the ruler of the hour, the planetary hour ruler. And here in this box over here, which is new to my students because I usually don't have this up in our classes, here we see that this box shows us that this question was asked during the hour of who?
Venus.
During the hour of Venus. Now, the full treatment of the planetary hours would be a little bit too much to go into for this podcast, but be it resolved, the ancients said that the day was divided into different hours, and each hour of the day was ruled by one of the 7 classical planets. And the beginning of the day, or the first hour of a day, was ruled by the planet after whom that day was named. So for example, in the case of Monday, who would the first planetary hour ruler be at sunrise on a Monday?
The moon?
The moon! The moon. Most definitely the moon. On Tuesday, who would the first planetary hour ruler be for Tuesday at sunrise?
Mars.
Mars, correct. Wednesday?
Oh, Wednesday.
Pause, children of the corn. Have we not done this already? Which planets rule the different days of the week?
No.
You cannot tell me that we haven't done this already. Hold on, Ganga is saying, precisely, Ganga is saying Mercury. Ganga is saying, yes, we did do this. And as
I did it with you separately.
You did it with me separately. And I see Shari nodding, which means that Shari also acknowledges that this was done. Shauna?
I 100% missed this. I'm sorry. I usually can recall, but I 100% missed this.
Look, Ganga saying it's in the working. Listen.
Wow.
Anyway, Let's just pretend as if this conversation didn't happen. Okay. So, so we see in this chart, the planetary hour ruler of this chart is whom?
Venus.
Venus. And as a result of Venus being the planetary hour ruler, Renaissance astrologers would say whether or not this chart was a radical chart or fit to be judged. Because in the Renaissance and also in the medieval period, they had many reasons for not judging a chart. And I'm not quite sure if I know of any horary astrologers today who wouldn't judge a chart that wasn't radical based on Renaissance standards. Because today I think that the working understanding is that every chart can be read. And when we see these things that the Renaissance astrologers called considerations before a judgment, it isn't necessarily that the chart cannot be read. It's just that we need to probably proceed with caution in the reading of the chart, because these considerations before a judgment already tell us something about what's going on within the body of the chart itself. So here with the planetary hour ruler being Venus, we see whether or not Venus shares in the triplicity of the sign that's rising on the cusp of the ascendant. And let's see, Shauna, tell me who the triplicity rulers of this sign on the ascendant would be.
Because it's a day chart, it would be Venus in the day. The out of sect would be Mars, and the participating would be the moon.
Precisely. So here we have, hey, look at you. You're so brilliant. I'm going to chop that out. But okay, Miss I Know Things. Go on with your bad self. Okay. Exactly, Shauna. So what we see is that this is indeed a diurnal chart, and the ruler of all water signs or signs of the watery triplicity in the daytime is Venus. So here, this chart would be radical or fit to be judged based on the fact that Venus is the triplicity ruler of this ascendant. However, we would still judge this chart because for me, I see the planetary hour ruler having a more nuanced purpose within horary astrology than it just determining whether or not this chart is okay to judge. Within my horary worldview, and also based on some of the research that I've done, this planetary hour ruler serves as a point of importance within the body of the chart itself. So I would look and see where this planetary hour ruler is located terrestrially within the chart. And as we can see, it's located over here in the 8th house in Scorpio. But I would also see what houses this planetary hour rules within this chart. And then I do the same thing for the natal chart. And all of this is based on the premise that the planetary hour ruler serves to build a bridge between the horary moment and the natal promise. And that's essentially the sort of bridge that we want to be building, because we need to see what is being triggered. I hate that word. I'll tell you why later. Because we need to see what is being invoked from within the body of that person's nativity in the moment that they're asking the question that they're asking. And so for that reason, we use the planetary hour ruler as one of the modes by which we gather that information. Do you understand? So the first thing that we notice with the planetary hour ruler being Venus is that Venus is over here in the 8th house. Ellen's question was, should I open a juice bar? Is that correct, Ellen?
That's correct.
Great. So with that question being, should I open a juice bar, we see that this Venus is over here in the 8th house. Now, let's see, Shauna, tell us some of the things that the 8th house signifies.
It would be debt, other people's money, death.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. So the eighth house has signification over debt, death, other people's money, taxes, money that isn't ours. Now, with Venus being in the house of debt, death, other people's money, and she's asking about this juice bar, what is the first thing you think of when you see that Venus located over there in the eighth house?
That she'll go into debt with this business.
That she'll go into debt with this business. That is literally A plus B equals C. It couldn't be clearer. So my first thought my first thought going into this chart is that the planetary hour ruler located in the eighth house of debt, death, and other people's money, we don't think that Ellen's going to die from this business. So because we've already ruled death out of the equation, our primary consideration is that she's going to be entangled in some way with other people's money insofar as this situation is concerned. Now, I'm not sure as it stands whether or not that means that she's going to enter debt, but it does serve as a primary indication that other people's money is involved. If we were to view this Venus from the perspective of her essential dignity, what is the first thing we notice about this Venus here?
She's in detriment being in Scorpio.
Venus is in detriment being in Scorpio. So in relation to Scorpio, Venus is in her detriment there because she has rulership in which sign?
Taurus being opposed.
Precisely. She has rulership in Taurus, and we know that Taurus is opposite to Scorpio. So we see that Venus is in a state of detriment being here in the eighth house. Now, she isn't in detriment because she's in the eighth house, because as we can see, this Venus is actually what in relation to that eighth house?
She's the ruler of that eighth house.
Venus is the ruler of that eighth house. So our Venus isn't in bad shape because she's in that eighth house, because Venus here rules the eighth house. What makes Venus in bad shape is that while in that eighth house, Venus is in the sign of her detriment. You see? So the indication that that automatically gives us is that there is something that is not right about these other people's money. And when we think about detriment, we fundamentally always have to go back to the word destruction. Because to be in your detriment is to be in a state that debilitates you and that makes you feel less than who you know yourself to be in your essence. If we think about this dichotomy of domicile and detriment, when I'm in my domicile, I'm someplace where I really want to be because that's the home that I've created for myself. That's why domicile ties into the word for home, domos. Irina, can you remind me of what the Russian word for home is, please?
Dom.
Dom, precisely. So this word domicile has to do with a home that we've created for ourselves. So when you're in your detriment, you're essentially opposite to that home that you've created for yourself. So if I'm Venus in Scorpio, I'd be looking around like, but I intentionally built my life so that I would never have to be in a place like this. This place is exactly the opposite of the sort of lifestyle that I thought that I'd have for myself. So that's the state of this Venus in Scorpio here. She's in her detriment because she's someplace that she intentionally wanted to not be, which is why she made her home in Taurus. Do you understand? It's like,
Yes.
I want to be in Taurus, and I know that Taurus suits me completely well, so I'm going to build my home over here on Island Taurus so that I never have to interact with Island Scorpio. However, at the moment, Venus is in Island Scorpio, and she's not doing too happy over there. So that's our first piece. Now, the next thing that we do is we take a look at the houses that Venus rules in this chart. And can you all tell me which houses Venus has rulership here?
She has rulership over the third house of siblings and community and the eighth house of death and debt.
Yes. So the first piece in terms of Venus having rulership over the third house of siblings and community, process of elimination. She's not going into business with her siblings, so that's already off of the table. But insofar as this Venus is showing us something that's really moving within the client or the querent at the moment, we can say that Ellen is wanting to know about what this business will do in terms of her relationship to her community, how this business will affect or impact her relationship to her community. And fundamentally, she also wants to know whether or not she will be able to tie in other people's money using our catchphrase for the 8th house, whether or not she'll be able to have access to other people's money in going into this business. And that can be in the form of investment, but that can be just in the form of pulling out a loan and going to the bank and saying, hey, I'm opening up a new business, I need a loan. That sort of thing, you see? So that's my first thought as I go into this chart and as I see that Venus being ruler of both the 8th house as well as the 3rd house. Now that we've gotten that initial information from just the planetary hour ruler itself, the state of that ruler and the houses that it rules, now let's go and take a look at Ellen's natal chart to see where this Venus is coming in her natal chart and what aspects of her natal chart are being brought to the fore in the context of the horary question that she's asking. Here is Ellen's natal chart. Now, what automatically strikes me is that the Venus, which serves as the planetary hour ruler of the horary chart, is showing up in which house for you, Ellen?
In the 10th house of career.
It's showing up in the 10th house of career. So just take a moment to think about how uncanny this is. Ellen was born in 1982. This horary chart was cast on the 5th of December, 2018, in which she's fundamentally asking a career question. And this planetary hour ruler of the moment, it ties in not only the question that she's asking about at the moment, but it also ties in her natal career promise. Do you see? So,
Yeah.
curiouser and curiouser. Now, the planetary hour ruler showing up in the 10th house says to us, and Ellen, you can answer this, it says to us that the chief piece of importance for you right now is what?
Career.
Career. And would you say that that was actually the truth for you when you asked that question? Was this seeming to be a major career choice for you at the moment? Or was this just something that you wanted to do as a side hustle?
No, it was a career choice.
Okay. So the planetary hour ruler has essentially linked in this career promise of her from her nativity with the horary moment. So here, what's even more curious is that we see that that Venus is having rulership over which houses, Shari?
Venus is ruling the 2nd house of wealth and movable possessions, and also the 7th house of love, relationships, etc.
So here what we see is that the Venus is tying in not only her natal promise as it relates to her career, but it also ties in her own standing with her own money, as well as relationships that she has with other people, and i.e. the business partnership that she was seeking to form at that moment in order to make this thing work. So what's curious about this is that in the horary chart, we basically see the same thing. Because in the horary chart, the Venus is located over here in that 8th house of other people's money, and it ties in with her role in the community. However, in the natal chart, we see that it's really bringing up to the forefront the fact that that Venus is tied in with her career specifically, the state of her own money, as well as the other people who she may be forming this partnership with. So we've gotten a lot of information, and that has just been from observing the planetary hour ruler and seeing where that planetary hour ruler takes us in relation to the chart itself. Now, the next thing that we're going to go into is the Dodecata Moria, or the 12th part of the Ascendant. And the Ascendant that we're referring to is the Ascendant of the horary chart. Now, what the Dodecata Moria, or the dwad, as it's oftentimes called, is a 12-part division of each sign of the zodiac into 2.5 degrees each, or 2.5 degrees each. So it would be as if you took the 30 degrees of Pisces and you cut them up into segments of 2.5 degrees, which 2.5 into that 30 would give us 12 segments of Pisces. So here we have to see what is the dwad, or what is the dodecatomoria of the rising sign, because the dwad tells us specifically what it is the person is wanting to know about. Whereas the planetary hour ruler serves as a major piece of what is being brought up for the person at the moment, the dwad tells us, and it points us oftentimes in a specific direction for what the person is wanting to know about. So we can do this in our brains if we do 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, starting with the first 2.5 of Pisces belonging to Pisces, and the second 2.5 degrees of Pisces belonging to Aries, third 2.5 degrees of Pisces belonging to Taurus, fourth 2.5 degrees of Pisces belonging to Gemini. We could do it that way. Or we could do the lazy version and go to solar fire and get our dwad report. And that's what we're going to do, because ain't nobody got time to be doing no 2.5, 2.5. So here we go. For those of you who aren't familiar with this function of solar fire, you come out here to the chart option, and then you go down to Vedic. You go down to Vedic, because in Vedic astrology, they also have this concept of dividing the signs of the zodiac into different segments. And so the dwad chart would be the 12th harmonic divisional chart, or the 12th divisional chart, the D12 chart in Vedic astrology. So we go over here and we click on Dwadashamsa, which is the dwad, and it will oftentimes already be highlighted. But I want to make sure that it's the horary chart that I'm looking for and not the natal chart. So I unhighlight the natal and I highlight the horary and I click OK. Then it brings up this box here. I click no, and here I have my dwad chart, my 12th harmonic chart. So we see that the portion of the ascendant in Pisces that's rising is Virgo. That's the only reason I pull up this chart, to see that Virgo is rising, okay? Because now that I see that Virgo is rising, I'm going to go back into the horary chart and search for where I find Virgo there. We pull up the D12 chart to see what portion of the ascendant, or rather what sign, is rising in the D12 chart, so that we can go back in the horary chart and investigate where we also find that same sign on the cusp of a house. So let's do it. Now we go back into our horary chart, and you can't make this stuff up. Where do we find Virgo on the cusp of the horary chart?
The 7th house.
The 7th house. The 7th house. Now, think about it. In the natal chart, we saw that Venus took us to which houses?
The 2nd and the 7th.
The 2nd and the 7th.
Okay.
And now, in the D12 chart, with Virgo being the portion of Pisces that's rising, we see that Virgo explicitly takes us to which house?
The 7th.
So here, what we're finding is confirmation of something that the planetary hour ruler has already stated from the natal promise of the person. And this is the premise of a lot of the horary astrology that I do, and it's also the premise of the book that I'm working on, that there is a fundamental link between the horary chart and the natal promise. And here we just saw that for ourselves, yes? Great.
Yes.
So
Yes.
with this dwad taking us to the 7th house, what is also of importance for Ellen at this moment?
Relationships.
Relationships. Or stated differently, with this Virgo being the dwad of the ascendant, what is really moving within the heart of Ellen at this moment?
Business partnerships.
Precisely. Business partnerships was really the main thing that was on Ellen's mind at the moment. So now that we have that as a fundamental piece, we can see why this Venus as the hour ruler shows up in this 8th house. because essentially Ellen is looking at the investment that she's going to get from her business partners. So here we see that the real issue for Ellen may not necessarily be, should I open a juice bar? But the real issue for Ellen may be, will I have strong business partners to enter into this business relationship with, or will they have the monetary assets necessary in order to help me build this business that is so meaningful to me? And we've gotten all of that, not even through an analysis of the chart, but just by looking at these initial considerations, by taking a look at the planetary hour ruler and seeing where that planetary hour ruler leads us, not just in the horary chart, but also in the natal chart, here and here, and also by taking a look at the D12 chart, the Dwadasham chart, and seeing where the dwad takes us back to the horary chart. And we see that that comes back up here on the 7th house cusp of business partners. So all of that has laid a wonderful groundwork for us entering this chart and us really getting to the core of what Ellen wants to know. And it's given us so much valuable interpretive information for our overall chart reading. So without even interpreting the chart yet, was that exciting?
Yes.
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 And you can see how much content there is to be gotten from integrating these methods into our horary practice. Those of you who want to play around with the planetary hour ruler as well as the dwad of the ascendant can go and have some fun with that. And in the next portion of this chart delineation, we'll show you how we actually go into the body of the chart itself. So you don't want to go anywhere, and you definitely want to stick around and see just how far down the rabbit hole this chart is actually going to take us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me again for round 2 of our chart delineation are my wonderful and amazing students from the Oraculos School of Astrology here once more. So student population, thank you for being here. Again, yeah, I mean, we actually didn't go anywhere. I mean, truthfully, we didn't go anywhere. That's why we're all still wearing the same clothing, because this is just the other half of the previous recording, because I figured it would have been too long to like have all of that in like one sitting. So I wanted to give you guys 2 halves. So this is the second half. We didn't go anywhere. We're still the same people, and we're just continuing. This week, what I'm doing is I am allowing you, dear viewer, to take a look at our lab here at the Oraculos School of Astrology so that you can see just what the students here are really learning. And this is in preparation for a month-long Renaissance Astrology Intensive that I'm planning in the month of July. So if any of you are interested in being a part of this month-long Renaissance Astrology Intensive, please do check out the link for my website in the description box below so that you can find out all the details of it. In this month-long intensive, we're not just going to be talking about the theory of Renaissance astrology, we're going to actually be putting Renaissance astrology to work rigorously over many charts, and not even just horary charts. So I thought initially that I wanted for this to be a horary intensive, but then I realized that it's really an astrology intensive. We're going to be looking at horary astrology charts. We're going to be applying the same method of using the planetary hour ruler, the dwad, and seeing where that takes us in the body of the chart itself. We're also going to be looking at natal charts and solar return charts. So you definitely want to sign up for this intensive, because it is going to be intense, because we're looking at not just one branch of astrology, but all branches of person-centered astrology. The horary, the electional, the natal, the predictive. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel, but also check out the link down below to see how you can be a part of our month-long Renaissance Astrology boot camp. I'm joking, it's not a boot camp. It kind of is a boot camp, but our non-boot camp for the month of July. We want to have you here with us. Now, we're going to get back to the chart that we were looking at, which is the chart that Ellen asked me to cast for the question of, should I open a juice bar? So here we go. The drama continues. I'm going to cut that part out. So without further ado, let's go. Now, before we actually go into the body of chart interpretation, Shauna, I know that you had a question about the use of the dwad in relation to our chart interpretation. Can you tell me what that question was, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is the dwad only relevant to the ascendant?
Yes. For the purposes of what we're doing here, the dwad is only relevant to the ascendant because this method of looking for the dwad, or the 12th part of the ascendant, is something that we find in the medieval period, and it's something that we specifically find in the work of Herman of Carinthia. And this is a translation of Herman of Carinthia's book, and it's called The Search of the Heart. And this is on consultation charts, interpreting thoughts, and calculating victors in traditional astrology, translated and edited by Dr. Benjamin N. Dykes. And so this method of finding the heart, or finding what was really moving within the heart of the querent, is what that book is about. And this use of the dwad is one of the ways in which we find what is essentially a hidden ascendant, or one of the ways in which we find a hidden aspect of what's moving within the heart of the querent at the moment of them asking the question, because that then gives us a true gateway into the heart of the person as to what it is they really want to know about. So we only apply the dwad to the ascendant for the purposes of our horary astrology. And I know people who use the dwad in natal astrology as well, even though I'm not sure how far back that method goes in terms of looking at the dwad of the sun to indicate the character or an underlying factor of the character of a person. I have seen it be very effective, and it is something that I've seen modern astrologers put to effect with great usefulness. So does that answer your question, Shauna?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thanks.
Awesome. Now that we've taken care of all of the preliminary pieces in terms of the planetary hour ruler and the dwad of the ascendant as indicating what is really moving within the heart of the querent, now we can go to our traditional method of delineating horary charts. So here we see that there is 16 Pisces rising, and with 16 Pisces rising, Shauna, we know that who is Lord 1 in this chart?
Jupiter.
Jupiter. And what would you say the state of this Jupiter is, Shauna? The essential celestial state of this Jupiter in itself?
Well, it's essentially dignified, being in its domicile of Sagittarius.
It's essentially dignified by being in its domicile of Sagittarius. And also, this Jupiter is further dignified by being in its zodiacal joy. Now, this concept of the zodiacal joy of the planets goes back to this concept of sect within traditional astrology. And we find that each of the 7 planets has a sign that it prefers to be in of its 2 domiciles, with the exception of the sun and the moon, of course, because we know that the sun only has 1 domicile, being
Leo.
Leo. And Shauna, we know that the moon only has 1 domicile, being
Cancer.
Being Cancer. So with the exception of the sun and the moon, the other 5 classical planets all share 2 domiciles. And one is masculine, one is feminine, one is diurnal, one is nocturnal. And so we find that planets that are diurnal prefer being in their diurnal signs. And here we see this Jupiter, which is a diurnal planet, prefers being in its diurnal sign of Sagittarius. There are other things that we can say about this Jupiter, because Jupiter is a diurnal planet in a diurnal sign, in a diurnal chart, above the horizon. And this is a classical concept in astrology called highs, that this Jupiter is in its highs, H-A-Y-Z. And this says that this Jupiter is fundamentally supported in all the ways that matter that allow this Jupiter to deliver on its promise. That's what it means for a planet to be in its highs, H-A-Y-Z. This Jupiter is fundamentally supported in all the ways that matter for it to deliver on the promise that it has within this chart. So we see that with the Jupiter, and we also see that this Jupiter is accidentally dignified by being in the 9th house. Now, this dignity by being in the 9th house is something that we have to really sit down and think about, because on one level, we know that the 9th house is a what type of house, Jessica?
Cadent.
Right. On one level, we know that the 9th house is a cadent house. And we know that based on our really arbitrary rules that we've put together to make this stuff a little bit more memorizable, planets in cadent houses have how much power to show their stuff?
The least amount of power to show themselves.
Right. So planets that are in cadent houses typically have the least amount of power to show their stuff. However, this isn't necessarily the case for the 9th house or the 3rd house. This is something that oftentimes throws people off, because the question then becomes, how can something in the 9th house be considered to be accidentally fortified when the 9th and the 3rd houses are just as cadent as the 6th and the 12th house? And we usually consider the 6th and the 12th house to be really awful houses, right?
Yes.
Great. But the rationale behind this, from the perspective of tradition, is very straightforward. And the rationale is that whereas the 6th house and the 12th house have no aspectual relationship to the ascendant, meaning they don't sextile the ascendant, they don't square the ascendant, they don't trine the ascendant, and they're also not in opposition to the ascendant. Whereas the 6th and the 12th house have no aspectual relationship to the ascendant, and they are also cadent. The 9th and the 3rd house, though cadent, do have an aspectual relationship to the ascendant. And that aspectual relationship that they have to the ascendant is what makes them beneficial insofar as houses are concerned, even though they are cadent houses. And we know that the aspect that the 9th house has to the ascendant is what type of aspect?
A trine.
It is a trine. Congratulations. And the aspect that the 3rd house has to the ascendant is what type of aspect?
A sextile.
A sextile. Therefore, we know that sextiles are what in relationship to trines?
Sextiles are half.
Precisely. A sextile is half of a trine. Therefore, we know that of the 3rd house and the 9th house, which of those two houses is going to be a stronger placement for a planet?
The 9th house.
The 9th house.
Precisely. Also, the 9th house becomes a stronger placement for planets because it's above the horizon. So that also is a factor for its strength, whereas the 3rd house is below the horizon. But the primary piece here is that 9th house being the house that has a trine relationship to the ascendant becomes stronger than the 3rd house if we were to have to judge the accidental fortitude of planets placed in both the 9th and the 3rd. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Bingo. So we see that this Jupiter is essentially dignified being in highs, but also being in his own domicile of Sagittarius. And we see that he's accidentally fortified by being in the benefic ninth house. Now, being in the ninth house is a fortitude, but we still can't shake from us the fact that this Jupiter is also cadenced there in that ninth house. So while being in the ninth house may be a good thing for this Jupiter, it still may not support Jupiter in all the ways that we would want for a planet to be supported in order to call this Jupiter powerfully placed in order to show its stuff. It's just saying that, hey, where I am in terms of my domicile is good for me, and being in the ninth house, it's good for me because it's better than being in the third house, it's better than being in the 12th house, and it's surely better than being in the sixth house. You see? So this is the rationale that I'm using as I go into the body of the chart. So Ellen, is there anything else within this chart that you notice about that Jupiter?
I noticed that it's very close to the sun and it's combust.
Right. So Jupiter, though the sun has already separated from Jupiter, it's only separated from that Jupiter by, let's call it 7 degrees. Let's call it roughly 7.5 degrees. And we know that the range of combustion is up until 8.5 degrees. If we follow the Renaissance text on this, it's up until 8.5 degrees. So while that sun has essentially separated from Jupiter and Jupiter is made better thereby, it's still combust. And if we go to our aphorisms, and I'm smiling because I send my students my aphorisms all the time that I painstakingly slaved over, and I'm not sure that anyone has read them. But anyway, if we look in our aphorisms, what we find is that a planet in its domicile, though combust, is like a powerful man imprisoned within his home by his king. So therefore, it doesn't change the fact that this Jupiter is powerful. It doesn't change the fact that within this chart, Jupiter is essentially one of 2 of the stronger planets within this chart, the second planet being the Saturn. So Jupiter is still very powerful where it is, but it's combust, which means if we were to put this into interpretational language, that potentially there's something within the life of the querent that isn't fully allowing her to step forward into the greatness that is indicated by this Jupiter. Now, because I am who I am, I don't just say, oh, Jupiter is in domicile and combust, therefore she's trapped there by her king. I want to find out who that king is. So I begin looking around the chart to see where do I see the domicile of the sun on the cusp of a house. Where do I see it?
The sixth.
Sixth house.
The sixth house cusp. Now, we know that the sixth house, Jessica, is a house of what?
It's a house of sickness and servitude.
It's a house of sickness, of servitude, and slavery. But another way that we can look at the sixth house is that the sixth house is a place where we do work that is unappreciated, or we do work that is undervalued in a sense. Because in the modern times, in order to recast the meanings of the houses, the sixth house became the house of menial labor or menial employment. And so here we can use that to indicate menial employment that the querent finds herself in, that she's unable to break free from, or some other job-related thing within her life that she finds herself in a state of servitude towards that has her bound, even though she knows that she's powerful. Now, Ellen, we're going to go over to you and tell us, does this make sense within the context of your own life and within the context of your career?
Yes, it does. Do you want details?
I mean, you could give us the Cliff Notes version.
So yeah, so the Cliff Notes version is that I do have an actual other job that is completely unrelated to a juice box that takes up a lot of my time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we see here. Now, what I would like for you all to get, dear listeners, as well as dear students, is that when we find the planet combust, I also find it useful not just to cast my interpretation on the fact that that planet is combust, but I also find it useful to take into consideration which house that sun is ruling, because that house is going to give us further information about what aspect of this person's life do they find themselves bound in. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
Now, another thing that's important for us to begin talking about is this concept of the almuten. Because this sun isn't just the ruler of the 6th house, but the sun is the almuten of the 2nd house. Now, the almuten, or the concept of the almuten, is a part of our traditional astrology where, in looking at houses, we don't just want to see the planet that is the domicile ruler of that house. We want to see whether or not there is another planet that has more dignities within that house than the domicile ruler, him or herself. So, for example, in a diurnal chart where the sun is above the horizon and there's Aries rising, then the sun becomes the almuten ruler of Aries in particular portions of Aries, as being stronger than Mars, the ruler of Aries, in Aries. Because Mars in Aries only has domicile rulership in Aries. It doesn't have exaltation in Aries. It doesn't have triplicity rulership in Aries. The term of Mars in Aries is from Jupiter rules up until 6 degrees Aries, Venus rules up until 14 degrees Aries, Mercury rules up until 21 degrees Aries, Mars rules up until 26 degrees Aries, and Saturn rules up until 30 degrees Aries. Therefore, Mars will rule between 21 degrees Aries and 26 degrees Aries. That will be the term of Mars in Aries. And then Mars also has face rulership in Aries because Mars rules the first 10 degrees of Aries. So, in terms of the major dignities, we see that at best, Mars in Aries will only ever have as much as 7 points of dignities in Aries, because Mars throughout the whole of Aries is in his domicile and therefore he gets 5 points. However, Mars in the first 10 degrees of Aries also gets another 1 point for being in his face, because we know that face has how many points? 1 point, precisely. So Mars in his face will get that additional 1 point. So we have 5 points for being in his domicile. We have 1 point for being in his face. So that's 6 points. But when Mars is in his face, he can't also be in his term, because the term of Mars in Aries falls between 21 degrees and 26 degrees. Therefore, Mars can have 6 points for being in his domicile and face. He can have 7 points for being in his domicile and term if he falls someplace between that 21 degrees and 26 degrees, but he can never have more than 7 points in Aries, because the section of Aries that he rules as his term is different from the section of Aries that he rules as his face. So Mars in Aries will always only have either 6 points in Aries or 7 points in Aries. Does that make sense? But he can't have 8. Whereas, let's look at the sun in Aries. The sun, when he is in Aries, has his exaltation in Aries, which is 4 points, yes?
Yes.
So if we look at our dignities and how the Renaissance astrologers gave points to the different levels of essential dignity, we have the domicile having how many points?
5.
5 points of dignity. We have the exaltation having how many points?
4.
4. Triplicity, I mean, if you get this one wrong, like, what are you doing? Triplicity has how many points?
3.
3.
3.
And then term or bound has how many points?
2.
2. And then face has how many points?
1.
1. Precisely.
1.
So we see that the sun in Aries in a diurnal chart is having exaltation in Aries, which is already 4 points, yes?
Yes.
But in a diurnal chart, the sun also has triplicity rulership in Aries, which is 3 points, yes?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the sun in Aries already has 7 points in a diurnal chart. 4 for being the exaltation ruler there, 3 for being triplicity ruler in a diurnal chart. We know that the luminaries have no terms or bounds, so the sun doesn't get points for having terms or bounds in Aries. But the final piece is that the sun also has face in Aries, which would be the second 10 degrees of Aries. So from 10 degrees to 20 degrees. So in Aries, if the sun falls in the second 10 degrees of Aries in a daytime chart, the sun has 4 points for being exaltation ruler, 3 points for being triplicity ruler, and 1 point for being face ruler. Therefore, the sun in the middling degrees of Aries in a daytime chart is more powerful than Mars in Aries in a daytime chart. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Therefore, we call the sun the almuten of whichever house has Aries on the cusp of it. This is a similar situation with Saturn, because in a daytime chart, Saturn in different parts of Libra stands to be more powerful than Venus in Libra, because Saturn is the exaltation ruler of Libra. Saturn is also the diurnal triplicity ruler of Libra. And Saturn is also having a term in Libra. Saturn rules the first 6 degrees of Libra. So if we have a diurnal chart and we have Saturn in Libra, within those first 6 degrees of Libra, what we end up with is Saturn having 4 points for being exaltation ruler. Yes?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How many points for being triplicity ruler?
3.
He has 3 points for being the diurnal triplicity ruler in Libra if it's a daytime chart. So that's already 7 points. Saturn rules from 0 to the first 6 degrees of Libra, which is really not 6 degrees proper. It's 5 degrees and 59 minutes, but that's a different story for another day. Saturn within those first 6 degrees of Libra, from 0 to 559, is having what level of dignity by being there? Term, which is how many points?
2.
2 points. So we have 4 from exaltation, 1, 2, 3 from triplicity, 1, 2 for term. Saturn has 9 points already in Libra. And if Saturn was in the last 10 degrees of Libra, and if Saturn were in the middle 10 degrees of Libra, Saturn would have an additional 1 point for being in his own face. He would be in his face, but not in his term. Therefore, he would have 8 points of dignity, as opposed to the 9 points of dignity that he would have by being in his term. Do you understand?
Yes.
All the same, Saturn stands to be more powerful in Libra in a daytime chart than the actual planet that rules Libra. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we would call Saturn the almuten of that house where we find Libra on the cusp. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So I went through all of that to say that here in this chart, not only is this sun, which has our querent combust, the ruler of the 6th house, the domicile ruler of the 6th house, because this is a diurnal chart, that sun is also the almuten ruler of Ellen's which house?
Second.
Second. Because this is a diurnal chart, that sun is also the almuten ruler of Ellen's second house. Now, I just worked that out in my brain because I've memorized all of the essential dignities and the entire essential dignities table, which is something that I teach my students as well. So all of my students have also memorized the essential dignities table because of what we call astro-mnemotechnics. And in our upcoming course this summer, I will be teaching all of the participants to also memorize the entire essential dignities table, because we are at our best when we have these things in our brain, is my personal belief. So if you don't have the entire essential dignities table memorized, then what you can do on Solify is go and right-click the chart in question, and it's going to bring up various chart options here. So at the moment, we're using my declinations chart option, but I want to go to classical charts so I can see who's the almuten of Ellen's second house, and indeed the almuten of every house. So I click on ancient, which has my medieval techniques, and I click OK. And here in the almuten box, what we see is that the sixth house has the sun as the ruler of the sixth house, yes?
Mm-hmm.
So the sun is the strongest planet that has rulership in the sixth house. We have Jupiter still representing the querent because Jupiter has the strongest amount of rulership in the first house, yes?
Okay.
However, in the second house, which represents Ellen's what?
Money.
Right. In the second house, which represents Ellen's money, we have the sun as being almuten ruler in the second house and co-ruler in the second house along with Mars. And here we see that there's Mars and Pisces. And if I move this box over to the side with you guys in it, we see that in Pisces, we can just use this essential dignities table and go straight across to see what level of dignity Mars has in Pisces. Here we see that Mars is having -5 in terms of its score. So there's a piece within the classical literature that says that if a planet is very weak essentially, but there is an almuten that can take its place, we should go with the almuten. And here we see that for the second house, the almuten has the potential to take the place of that Mars in representing Ellen's money. Yes? Now, I really don't like this whole chart option that has all of these things on the screen because I would just rather be able to work it out in my own brain. So I'm going to move this, go back to our regular chart, my declinations chart. And so from this information that we got from the sun being almuten ruler of Ellen's second house, we can say that Ellen is not only bound by virtue of the labor tasks that she's doing, that she doesn't feel a deep heart connection to, but she's also bound because of what?
Money.
Because of money.
No?
She's also bound because of money. Now, Ellen, you just answered that. So would you say that that was true for you at the time in terms of opening up a juice bar, that money was also a binding consideration for you?
Yeah, they were pushing to do not just a juice bar, but also a studio that was really, really expensive. So the expense would have been much, much more. So it was a big concern, the money side of things. Yeah.
Right. So do you feel as if that is what had you wanting a business partner and essentially wanting that business partner to invest in your dream?
Not necessarily why I wanted the business partner. It was them that brought the second part of it, but I think I just wanted a partner because I enjoy splitting, you know, kind of splitting it with everybody, with somebody else.
Yeah, got it. Well, I brought back up the business partner piece because we see that the dwad of the Ascendant takes us back to the business partner, saying that the business partner is an important piece in any event. And we do see that the Venus, which is ruling the planetary hour, takes us over here to the business partner's potential to invest. So this Venus represents the business partner's investment potential. And as Shauna pointed out, what do we think this business partner's investment potential is with their Venus in Scorpio?
Not very strong.
Not very strong. Not very strong. Or it may be that they probably do have the money to invest, but they aren't willing to use their money to invest in this particular venture that Ellen has in mind. So it can either be a strength of their money itself not being strong enough, or it can be they themselves not wanting to put their money in a position for it to be utilized by Ellen in this thing that she's asking about. Furthermore, their money isn't in Ellen's pocket. It's in whose pocket?
Their own.
It's in their own pocket, which says that that money isn't trying to leave their pocket to come into Ellen's pocket, or even leave their pocket to come into the house that represents the dream of the new career. That money is fixed. At 1 degree Scorpio, we remember that Scorpio is a fixed water sign, yes?
Yeah.
And it's at 1 degree, which means that this person's money loyalties are very much fixed to the place where it finds itself, and it's in no way, shape, or form trying to build a bridge between itself and Ellen, is a consideration that I have. Now, so far, we've seen that money is a big deal within this situation for Ellen, but we've also seen that the way in which the other work that she has gets in the way of the overall dream or vision that she wants to fulfill. So let's go and now take a look and see what house represents this new juice bar as a potential career path. You guys tell me, what house represents starting a new business with this juice bar?
10th.
10th house.
The 10th house.
10th house.
So we go to the 10th house and we look for the ruler of the 10th house to give us the promise of the 10th. And you all look and tell me, who rules this 10th house?
Jupiter.
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 Jupiter is ruling the 10th house. So what we see is the same condition that Ellen finds herself in is the same condition that the career finds itself in. And what is that condition? It's a really powerful goal to have. It's a really great and amazing goal and dream and vision that Ellen has, but it's being forced to shelter in place, like all of us during this coronavirus season. It's being forced to shelter in place in the 9th house by its king. And who is the king at this moment? It's this work down here that Ellen doesn't like to do. And it's also the monetary relationship that Ellen has to potentially getting this job done. Do you see?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what we see is that exactly as Ellen is, so too is the dream that she has. Now, let me hand it to you all. Which house do we know represents the fulfillment of desires?
The 11th house.
11th.
The 11th house. Now, this term, the fulfillment of desires, is something that I discovered when I was studying Vedic astrology, but it's something that I really, really, really love in relation to even Western delineation. So the 11th house represents the fulfillment of desires, and here we see who is Lord 11?
Saturn.
Saturn. Saturn. So once again, we see that these dreams that Ellen has, this impetus that she has towards the fulfillment of her desires are really, really, really strong, are they not?
Mm-hmm.
They are.
So Ellen is saying, yeah, they are.
They are.
They are. Because Saturn is in his domicile of Capricorn. Now, just because a dream is strong doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to manifest in the way that we want it. And when we look in the 11th house itself, what we find there is both Pluto and the South Node. Now, let me stick a pin and just say that me, as a traditional astrologer, I completely and unequivocally use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto within my chart delineation. So the fact that Uranus is essentially the planet that is rising to the cusp of the ascendant in this first quadrant of the chart has already triggered my attention. The fact that Neptune is over here sitting on the cusp of the ascendant has already triggered my attention. So what I'm looking at is a chart in which there are many factors coming up for Ellen at this moment within her life that are beyond Ellen's control. And we've seen that purely through the lens of our classical astrology by noting the fact that this Jupiter, though powerful, is combust, have we not?
Yes.
And combustion, especially in the case of these slower moving planets or these planets that move slower than the sun, combustion represents something that is essentially out of your control because you're not applying to the sun is applying to you. Which means there you are, just sitting down, minding your own business, and then all of a sudden you feel this fire behind your back. And you're looking around and you can't even see what's coming. But all you can see is this fire that's approaching you from behind. And that is the sun coming to spoil your day and coming to completely burn you up. So here, this Jupiter is a passive recipient of that combustion. Because that combustion happens to that Jupiter. That Jupiter doesn't take itself into the belly of the furnace. The belly of the furnace throws itself on Jupiter. So here, all Ellen can essentially do is wait for that influence to pass. Wait for the relationship to that work that she doesn't quite like doing to change. And also wait for the relationship of her to the monetary things going on within this juice bar question to change. So we see Ellen in this question having to wait, waiting for that sun to move as far away from Ellen as possible for Ellen to begin to feel some sense of her own personal dignity and greatness again. Do you understand? Because guess what? In the daytime when the sun is in the sky, you're not seeing anything else other than that sun. So in the daytime, this being a diurnal chart, and you looked up, you weren't seeing Jupiter up there. You weren't even seeing Mercury there. You probably weren't even seeing the moon there. You weren't seeing Venus, you weren't seeing Saturn, and no one can see Pluto. When the sun is doing its thing, and when the sun steps into a room, everything else becomes subservient to that sun. Everything else gets absorbed and is vanished in the radiance of that sun. So here is Jupiter over here wanting to be great. And here is the sun saying, great? Who's great? Me? Yes, I, the sun. The menial job that you don't like doing. I am great. Yes, me, I, the sun. Your relationship to your monetary stuff right now within this question. I am great. I'm the one who makes the decisions in this situation, not necessarily you, Jupiter. Yes, you are strong, but insofar as I'm in the sky, the only thing you'll see in that sky is me. Signed, the management. We get it?
Get it?
Yes.
Now, Ellen, do you get it?
Don't worry, I got it.
Okay.
I certainly got it.
Yeah, but does this make sense in relation to your own life, Ellen?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah. And you know, this was a year and a half ago, almost. So your relationship to this may have changed in that time. But we have to remember that horary astrology is the astrology of the moment. So that's saying that at this time, Ellen, at the end of 2018, you may have really been feeling this as a major determining piece for you in relation to the juice bar.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So this sun has already indicated that Ellen is dealing with forces beyond her control. Insofar as any one of us who is combust are having to face forces beyond our control. Is it not? So with that being the consideration, the fact that we then also find so many potent points of contact from our outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, only serves as further confirmation that the things that Ellen is going through within this situation are things that she can't really control. So yes, Ellen, while the fulfillment of your hopes and desires and aspirations represents a point of strength within your life, those dreams are strong. When we look within that 11th house, we find Pluto. And Pluto can be an indication that you dream of having great financial success by virtue of this vision of yours, or you dream of attracting great financial support or assistance, or the assistance of great financial people, because Pluto oftentimes can represent people of great wealth. Because Pluto, as god of the underworld, wasn't just the god of the dead, but he was also the god of the wealth of the earth, is it not?
Yes.
So with Pluto in the 11th, it can represent you wanting to attract great power by virtue of opening this business, you wanting to attract great financial support from wealthy people by opening this business, great wealthy clientele by opening this business. But the flip side of Pluto is that Pluto represents the subterranean influences that oftentimes reigns and operate. Here I am, Persephone, virgin of the world, just lounging about in this field of flowers on this beautiful spring day. And here comes Pluto out of the pits of hell itself to steal me, to kidnap me, to rape me, and sweep me off to hell, where I'm going to become his wife for the rest of eternity. You see? So there's two sides of Pluto. Pluto the wealthy, as well as Pluto the insidious. And the relationship of Pluto to this 11th house, based on the fact that we've already seen that Ellen is bound in a way that doesn't give her the freedom to move as freely as she would like to, the relationship of Pluto to this 11th house could be that there are forces beyond your control, Ellen, that may interfere with the establishment of this goal or this desire that you have. You understand?
Yes.
Now, the Pluto is one testimony of that, but we also see what else is in that 11th house with that Pluto.
The South Node.
The South Node. And as we all know, the dragon eateth from the North Node, and he does what at the South Node?
Shitteth.
He shitteth. The dragon eateth from the North Node, and he shitteth through the South Node. So here we have the dragon essentially shitting. Maybe I should cut that out. But here we have the dragon. Oh, Irina
says yes.
Irina's saying that I can't say shit on my own podcast.
Anyway, reason.
So here we have the point of where the dragon shitteth being in Ellen's 11th house, which can be an indication that the things that we're trying to establish in that 11th house are somehow being undermined by forces that are once again beyond our control. We can't control where these nodes show up. Neither can we control the outer planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, on that note of the outer planets, we see what planet strongly conjunct the cusp of the ascendant?
Neptune.
And it's conjunct the cusp of the ascendant within 3 degrees. But visually, we see this Neptune essentially sitting on the ascendant. Now, what this means for us is that this Neptune impact is coming in very strongly within Ellen's consideration as she asks about this question. Now, Jupiter in and of itself, we know, is a dreamer. Jupiter is optimistic. Jupiter is the planet that defines what optimism is to a large degree. If we read through our classical texts, it calls Jupiter optimistic and idealistic, and it says that Jupiter seeks to do the benefit of everyone. So in this way, Jupiter is already a far-flung dreamer. Jupiter in Sagittarius is even more of a far-flung dreamer who wants to do the things that have never been done before and who wants to do something that is completely unique and idealistic and pioneering. And when we add Neptune into the equation, Neptune only further amplifies the power of those dreams. Now, normally, this could possibly be a good thing. But based on all the other things that we see here within this chart, the Neptunian effect coming in may be less one that amplifies those dreams and be more one that causes a sense of confusion and uncertainty, and that prevents the querent from essentially seeing clearly what's really going on within the situation. Now, Ellen, you're the only one who can qualify that for us. Do you feel as if, as this situation was panning out for you, there was a lack of clear vision? Now, even though there was a strong vision of what you wanted your dream to be, that there was still a lack of clarity in seeing all the other moving parts that were actually going on at the moment?
Yeah, there was a little bit. I mean, there were some aspects that had to do with the place itself, and there were aspects to do with the partnership itself. But yeah, there was definitely a little bit of not having as much clarity as was necessary, I think.
And so that's what the Neptunian piece can be saying. The Neptune piece says that, yes, this dream is a strong part of you, and yes, you identify strongly with that dream, because anything that is having this sort of relationship to the ascendant is something that you identify strongly with. And that is my rule of thumb in terms of horary astrology, but it's also something that I hold near and dear to my heart in terms of natal astrology as well. If in natal astrology you see a planet that is strongly conjunct the ascendant in this manner, you know that this planet is something that is also strongly having an effect on the life of the native. Do you understand?
Yes.
So she identifies strongly with this Neptunian piece, which is a visionary piece, which is an idealistic piece, which is the piece of the dreamer, but it's also an effect of not allowing you to see all the moving pieces and not really allowing you to see what's actually going on. Because the Neptunian effect is for us to get so caught up in these dreams that we have that the fact that the world is burning around us sometimes slips our awareness. And it's no fault of ours, but any of us who has a dream that we feel very strongly about tends to get caught up in the fabric of that dream in a way that doesn't really allow us to see all the moving pieces. Now, I'm crossing into modern territory for a second, but Evangeline Adams would say that any planet that's rising towards the ascendant, insofar as this is Uranus rising towards the ascendant, indicates what's rising within the life of the querent at that moment. So here we see Uranus rising up to the ascendant, because anything that's in the second house rises up towards the first house. It rises towards the ascendant. And with Uranus rising, it says that Uranus, which is a planet of disruption, a planet of breakages, a planet of breaking apart, is rising up to the ascendant in relation to this question that Ellen is asking. Do you all see that?
Yes.
So probably even unbeknownst to Ellen, this Uranian effect of the severance of our relationship or the breaking apart of something that she probably thought was necessary for this thing to happen, that was probably necessary for this thing to happen, is rising up to the ascendant. And when it gets there, chances are that relationships that she thought that she had, or the dream that she thought that she had, gets radically rearranged. Do you see? Now,
Yes.
Ellen, once again, asking you, do you feel as if this Uranus rising effect was something that... Do you feel as if this Uranus rising effect was something that proved to be truthful for you within the situation?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very, very abrupt ending without much explanation. So yeah, it kind of came from nowhere, months after months and months of planning. And yeah, just a decision kind of out of the blue that really caught me off guard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that language is language that we can use to speak about Uranus in general. Now, the final two things that we're going to do is let's just quickly take a look at the potential business partner to see what type of person that person was to begin with. Now, the business partner we will find in which house?
The seventh.
The seventh house. So, Ellen, tell me, who is the ruler of the seventh house?
Mercury is the ruler of the seventh.
Mercury is the ruler of the seventh house. Now, Shauna Dawkins, tell me, what is the state of that Mercury in that seventh house?
Mercury is in Scorpio, so I think it's Peregrine.
It's Peregrine. And it's also?
Retrograde.
And it's also retrograde. Now, for those of us who don't know what Peregrine means, what does Peregrine mean? Oh, sorry, I just had a brain fart. Now, for those of us who don't know what Peregrine means that a planet has absolutely no relationship to a part of the zodiac where it finds itself. So this Mercury here is in Scorpio. Mercury isn't in its domicile. He's not in its detriment. He's not in its exaltation. He's not in its fall. Mercury has no triplicity rulership over water signs. Mercury, the term of Mercury in Scorpio is Mercury rules. Well, in Scorpio, the terms are Mars ruling up until the first 6 degrees, Jupiter ruling up until 14, Venus ruling up until 21. Mercury rules up until 27, actually. But this is 27, 23, which means that this Mercury has moved out of his own terms and is now in the terms of Saturn. And truthfully, it wasn't even 27 to begin with. Mercury would technically only rule up until 26 degrees, 59 minutes of Scorpio. So here we see that this Mercury has moved into the terms of Saturn. And in terms of phases, we know that the first phase of Scorpio is Mars. The second phase of Scorpio is the Sun. And the third phase of Scorpio is going to be Venus. So this Mercury is absolutely Peregrine. And what Peregrine means is that you are out in the world, lost and confused, roving, in a sense, like a disembodied spirit, not having any place to put yourself because you're a foreigner in a strange land. And you have to depend on the goodwill of your environment in order to bolster you up. Now, it's Peregrine, so it has no essential strength of its own, as well as it's retrograde. And from Betham Centiloquium, we know that a planet retrograde is like a man infirm, stupefied, and solicitous. So we have Ellen's potential business partners, Peregrine, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do with themselves, and probably thinking that they are figuring out who they are in terms of entering this business partnership with Ellen. Because oftentimes, when you don't know what to do with yourself or with your money, you look to someone who seems like they know what they're doing with themselves and their money, and you try to associate yourself with that person for the purpose of you figuring your own life out. And so what we see here is a potentially very opportunistic Mercury in Scorpio, but it's retrograde. It's moving in the wrong direction, and it doesn't have the power to attain anything. One, because of its essential debility by being Peregrine, but two, also because if Ellen is seeking forward motion, then this Mercury is moving in the wrong direction. You see it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the business partner. And as Ellen said, the business partnership, it broke apart without any explanation, or without much explanation, which I find ironic because the mute signs in traditional astrology are the water signs: Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So how interesting it would be that there was very little explanation to this abrupt ending of the relationship when this Mercury is both Peregrine and retrograde, as well as in a mute sign. So far, we would tell Ellen that, Ellen, this thing that you're wanting to do right now in terms of opening this juice bar, it isn't the best thing in the world for you. And it's probably not going to end well because of forces in your environment beyond your control, because of your own relation to your own work, because of your relationship to the finances attached to the situation right now, and also because the people who you're choosing to go into a business partnership with, they're not really the most scrupulous people in the world. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it turned out that way.
Yeah. And then the very final thing that we see here as the icing on the cake is that the moon, which is co-significator of the querent in every question, is located in which sign?
Scorpio.
And what precisely? And what relationship does the moon have to Scorpio?
In her fall.
The moon in Scorpio is in her fall. And the moon in Scorpio is possibly one of the worst signs that we can see the moon insofar as it's a place that is absolutely damaging and destructive to the moon. And so that can be a further indication to us that this thing that Ellen is asking about, or at least the time in which she is asking about it, are not appropriate because of forces, once again, beyond her control. Now, Scorpio, as we know, is a sign that we call intense. And so this may be saying that there may be a lot of intense passion on the part of the querent to really attain this dream that she's looking for. But that intensity can oftentimes lead us in directions that don't end up serving us well. And so it may have been the passion to join with someone who said, hey, yeah, I'll join with you. Or it may have been some other aspect of the situation. But it says that that intensity that's indicated by this moon, it doesn't bode well for the situation that she finds herself in. That's it.
And then I have a question. And then because they're so close together, I mean, aspect wise, we're not going to go into that just because of them being so close to each other and not forming an aspect.
At this point, we already have a clear, clean story. But the other piece that I would look at are the aspects within the chart, because our astrology isn't just an astrology of placement, it's also an astrology of dynamic relationships. And the aspects show those dynamic relationships. So here, in terms of aspects, we see that Ellen is Lord 1 as well as Lord 10. So if we were going to look for an aspect of perfection between Lord 1 and Lord 10, there can be no aspect of perfection between Lord 1 and Lord 10 because we look specifically to the nature of that Jupiter to tell us what the promise of this question is going to be. And we've already seen and spoken about the nature of that Jupiter and the things that are happening to that Jupiter that have that Jupiter bound and otherwise occupied in such a way whereas he cannot deliver right now. Not until that sun has left him alone, he cannot deliver on his promise right now at this moment. So that's the first aspect that we might look at. Now, the second aspect that we would look at would be the aspect between Ellen and her potential business partner. And we see that there is no aspect between Ellen and the potential business partner, and it may have been that Mercury would have applied to that Jupiter, but they're essentially in signs that are adjacent to one another, and therefore there is no aspect between the two of them, and furthermore that Mercury is even further separating from applying to that Jupiter by being retrograde. So, in terms of the relationship between Ellen and her business partners, how might we say that that relationship will pan out?
There's no relationship there.
Not well.
There's no relationship there, not well. Now, other aspects that we can look at are aspects to the moon or aspects that the moon is going to make. And we see that the very next aspect we make with our moon is going to be that application to that Mercury, and that Mercury is also applying to that moon. Now, what I do in my mind when I look for aspects is I zoom around the chart, I hold on to 25, and I zoom around the chart looking for 25. And the very next thing that I see close to that 25 is going to be that 27 with that Mercury. So the moon is applying to Mercury, and Mercury is applying to that moon. And what that indicates is that there is going to be something that happens, but the moon is weak and the Mercury is weak, which means that this thing, this action that's going to take place is an action that is probably of no benefit to anyone. And so said, so done. And Ellen, you said to us that the relationship between the two of you broke apart, and has there been a mending of that relationship, or has there been anything to bring the two of you together again for the purpose of creating this juice bar?
No. So it ended abruptly, and yeah, that was it. It ended, and we haven't spoken since.
Okay. So that's about it for this. And as we have seen, this chart has been an accurate and an adequate description of the nature of the events that occurred within the life of the querent, not just in the present moment of her asking the question, but the chart has also given us judgments of futurity. And the future of this question was that there would be no relationship between Ellen and the business partner, and therefore the juice bar that she wanted to open at that time has not yet been opened. Now, because time is this infinitely vast and wonderful thing, it doesn't say that it cannot be opened, because as we've seen, we have a very strong Jupiter here, and we also have a very strong Saturn representing the fulfillment of those desires. But at that time, there are more elements within the chart that prevented this question from coming together in an auspicious manner than there were elements that actually supported Ellen in this thing that she was seeking to attain. Thank you all so much for joining us here for another episode of the Oraculos True Divination podcast. I sincerely hope that you all enjoyed seeing how we integrate some little known aspects of horary astrology into our horary delineation. Please go and test these methods out on your own horary charts and see where it takes you. And I trust that you're going to end up someplace a little bit more interesting, and possibly you're going to end up someplace that gives you further confirmation for things that the chart itself is already saying to you. So thank you all so much for joining once again. Please remember to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can be a part of the momentum that we're building here at the Oraculos True Divination podcast. And also for my students from the Oraculos School of Astrology, thank you all so much for being here and for being so brilliant, because it means so much to me to be able to share this as a platform with you, not just today, but all the days that we have classes. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being such wonderful students and for sticking with this process, because you guys definitely make me proud.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So until next time, everyone, this is the Oraculos True Divination podcast. I am Mychal A. Bryan, sending you all lots of love, wishing you a heart full of joy and happiness. Until next time, be well. Bye.